Well, Professor, so now to kind of flesh out your differences and kind of this ongoing debate with Žižek. Now, of course, Žižek kind of puts forward this idea of ontological incompleteness, which is also something
Yeah.
that I'm fully drawn towards. So I was trying to prepare for this conversation, and I read Žižek's book on freedom a couple of months ago.
Yes.
Then there's one part here, if you don't mind, if I could just read it out. He says in the book Freedom. A disease without cure. Being involved in a decades-long debate with Adrian Johnston, I gladly accept his designation of a difference as one between layer cake and donut in your ontology.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you also did write a little have a bit of a debate with him in this book Zizek Response, which is an excellent
Yes.
read too. This debate between cake and donut.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so also if you could take as much time as you need for this because I find it fascinating and kind of try to outline these ontological differences between the donut model and the cake layer cake model between yourself and Zizek.
Yes. Well, I should say that with Žižek, so starting in 1996, in that year, he brings out his book, The Indivisible Remainder, an essay on Schelling and related matters. And one of the striking and novel features of that particular work from the mid 1990s is that this was the first time, the initial occasion when Žižek attempted to use his, at that point, primarily his combination of German idealism with Lacan, and in this case, more precisely, sort of Lacanianized Schelling, to engage with quantum physics. And so this gesture of taking recourse to quantum physics for fleshing out a particular sort of materialism that would involve this idea of ontological incompleteness, et cetera. This is really the first place where you see Žižek do that. And then more recently, it's as though that project from the indivisible remainder has, over the course of the past, I'd say, probably about 15 years, sort of returned with a vengeance in his more recent work, where he now talks about his version of dialectical materialism as essentially involving this particular hybrid German idealist Lacanian manner of engaging with quantum physics. For instance, his 2020 book "Sex and the Failed Absolute" is his, I think, most recent sustained presentation of that. And in fact, right now he's back to working on quantum physics again, and has been in conversation with a number of eminent figures in that field,
Like Lee
and is
Smolin.
very, yes, that's
Like
right.
Lee
And
Smolin.
so
Yeah.
yeah, he's in the middle of working on all of that right now. But one aspect of the cake versus donut model that you're talking about has to do with how, in debating with him about some of these issues, one of the things that I did is go back to Schelling himself, and looking at Schelling's philosophy of nature and related aspects of Schelling's larger, for lack of a better word, metaphysics. That it became very clear to me that with Schelling's account of autonomous subjectivity, of the subject in its fullest freedom, as concerns Zizek, that Schelling makes clear that for him, what this is a matter of is, so Schelling, and this is material crucial to Zizek's version of Schelling. The middle period Schelling, starting with Schelling's 1809 Freiheitsschrift, his essay on human freedom, and running through the ages of the world up to around 1815 or thereabouts. That this middle period Schelling especially is dear to Zizek. And this Schelling has this distinction that Zizek uses again and again between ground, Grund, and existence, existence. And this ground existence distinction, for Schelling, the idea is that what we ordinarily take to be reality is what he calls existence, which is this tamed and domesticated, field of constituted entities and events that is organized in a lawful fashion, that is intelligible for us, as knowing subjects, that we are able to cognitively map, get our bearings in relation to, etc. But that this entire domain that we inhabit of this intelligible reality that Schelling calls existence arises from and sits atop this more foundational underlying ontological basis that Schelling calls ground. And that this ground for the middle and late period Schelling is not a calm, organized, lawful, rule-governed second reality. It is instead this unruly, conflict-ridden, anarchic, it's kind of like this primordial chaos almost. And then for Schelling, what we take to be instances of effective human freedom in our constituted reality of existence are for Schelling returns of the repressed ground. It's as though the impersonal, anonymous, unruly basis of all being returns in this, localized fashion in and through human subjects, and that my own subjectivity, in terms of when I am free, and in those instances in which I can be said to be acting autonomously, that what is happening is in and through me, this ground is in a sense intruding into the domain of existence. It's a moment at which that underlying ontological unruliness breaks through the congealed crust of existence and makes itself felt again, and perturbs that field of existence now from within. But of course, in my view, I don't, it almost seems a bit like Schelling is cheating. And I call this a donut model because although Hegel is usually seen as being guilty of privileging, the idea of circularity, or this notion of, coming back to where you started, et cetera, that it's really with Schelling that you get this model where it's that, all right, ground gives rise to the various emergent levels and layers of existence. And then at the kind of highest level of emergence, at the level of existence, namely our subjective autonomy, that highest point is just the return of the lowest, basis. So it's as though we, in fact, just go through, a series of layers arranged in a donut shape. And then when we get to the highest emergent layer, we've closed the circle and rejoined, the lowest point. So, the highest point of the emergent levels of existence is the return of the ultimate underlying ground. And so it's this, layered, circular, donut shape kind of that you get with Schelling. Whereas, I argue with Hegel, if you look especially at Hegel's philosophy of nature and then his account of the emergence of human-mindedness out of nature in, the volumes 2 and 3 of his encyclopedia, that it's not that for him, the various aspects of what we associate with Geist, spirit, mind, in its various, forms associated with our subjectivity. That for Hegel is not just, in a sense, the resurgence of something, from the most primitive, metaphysical basis of existence that then reintrudes within a constituted field of natural and human reality and its, in all of its particular features. That there's, something irreducibly distinct and new about human freedom, rather than it being just, in a sense, tapping back into what is oldest and most archaic. And then Žižek, when he, engages with quantum physics, in a way that's influenced by Schelling, it's no accident that Žižek flirts with this idea that, in a way, his idea of the negativity of autonomous subjectivity, a la Žižek, is sometimes that this is, in a way, like with Schelling, but now an updated terminology, that this is a kind of return in ordinary non-quantum reality of certain unruly aspects of the quantum universe, right? That it's as though you have quantum physics as this shadowy Schellingian ground, and then you have the classical universe we inhabit, of course, resulting from things like the collapse of the wave function, as like Schelling's existence. And that when human freedom comes into play for Žižek, I think he's sometimes tempted to take this Schellingian shortcut and to say that, well, that's in a sense something like quantum indeterminacy, et cetera, returning within the constituted field of classical non-quantum reality. And it's, to me, one of the ironies is that for someone who also, of course, in part thanks to his fidelity to things like German idealism and dialectical materialism, for somebody who wants a non-reductive account of subjectivity, this seems to be a remarkably reductive move, is to say essentially that, solving the problem of human mindedness or subjectivity is just simply a matter of, we could really say that the smallest ultimate constituents of physical reality are, in a sense, where we are to go looking for the basis of what we call subjectivity. I mean, that's, of course, a hard-nosed, physical reductionist or eliminativist, I don't think ultimately would have too much of a problem with that. But efforts to do this, I mean, like you go back to something like Roger Penrose's work, like The Emperor's New Mind. To the best of my knowledge, nobody has really gotten very far actually trying to flesh out, okay, if you're going to assert that there's some type of direct connection between the quantum level and then our subjectivity or mindedness, well, it would seem you would need to have the ability to flesh that out at the level of the relevant sciences. And as far as I know, nobody is even remotely close to being able to do that. And so, maybe in the long run, decades, centuries down the road, assuming we last that long as a species, we'll get around to, we might be able to flesh out those details and vindicate something like the Žižekian speculative hypothesis that would have it that, subjective freedom is a kind of return within the field of classical reality of certain aspects of quantum reality. That to me is something that will require a very patient wait and see outlook. And in the meantime, this is why I also say, well, look, if you're going to spend time diving into the natural sciences in relation specifically to a non-reductive yet still compatible with materialism or naturalism account of subjectivity, there's plenty of work to be done, starting at the level of neurobiology, which would seem to be the natural scientific level closest to, what we're concerned with when talking about mindedness, and to work those problems out. And again, whether or not there's going to be any possibility of vindicating a speculative hypothesis about a direct link between, our subjectivity and quantum mechanics, I just think that there's not much that we can do for the time being except wait and see, how much progress is made thanks to a huge amount of collective scientific labor in different fields over the decades, and further to and beyond that, to see whether or not that can end up getting substantiated in any way.